You know, he hasn't changed much from the days when he used to be an activist, leading the ANC in Johannesburg. But he never became a mayor of Johannesburg, despite all valiant efforts. And he retreated to banking. Colleagues, Minister Gordhan, there's a correct pronunciation of his name, Gordhan, not Gordon. Gordhan, which means the shepherd. Minister Manuel, everybody else. Apparently in Africa, they say that once a minister, always a minister. Now he masquerades as chairman of companies, but he's a minister. I'm very pleased to be back here to interact with those of you who have an interest in the South African economy, our trials and tribulations. I particularly welcome those who always take the correct position in the market when we are in trouble. So it's really good to see you. So let's just walk with me on this very short journey, and let's see where we'll end. Last week we presented the medium-term budget statement against the backdrop of a slowing South African economy in a technical recession, which means by definition our revenue collection would suffer. By logical extension, therefore, it means that our spending plans will also be affected, and we have to revise our ambitions downwards. Against the background of a persistently high wage bill in the public sector, which means that if we are not careful, a greater amount of our budget will be consumed by the public sector wage bill. Against the background of state-owned enterprises which are struggling in many ways, and the minister is here to talk about that. Against the background of global trade wars started by some people who live in the city, which is not very helpful to global economic performance. Yet, part of the background of this walk I'm taking with you is not as bad as it sounds. We have inflation still contained within the inflation target band of 6 to 3%. I always wanted to emphasize the downward trend, not 3 to 6, because it looks it's going up, we want it to go down. An independent central bank which operates without fear or favor, despite attempts from time to time by the uninformed to interfere with the bank. At least now he has an ally. We'll try and maintain the dikes so that the water doesn't destroy anything. Now, The Minister of Mines has come to the party and begun to indicate positive signals. That's good. Minister of Public Enterprises has begun the reform process of the state-owned enterprises, good part of the journey. The President has appointed his presidential envoys for investment, very good. So there are many other good things along this path that we are walking. So, what to do? The question that arises is, where is the growth going to come from in South Africa? Against this difficult background that I've just sketched on this journey. Probably from two parts. Firstly, the investment drive that we have embarked upon. Once we are clear which sectors and subsectors this investment drive will affect, there's no point, Minister, saying there's $200 billion of investment going where? In which specific sector and subsector? That's what we're interested in, not the macro figure. Macro figure is nice for the governor and myself, but the specific sectors and subsector. And I think that's what the investment envoys are going to discuss with you later today. So I think that we should help generate some growth. Secondly, the infrastructure drive that we want to promote should help generate some growth. The kind of infrastructure drive that characterized the mood in South Africa pre-2010. That's what we need. Do we have what it takes to achieve that? The answer is yes, we do. And if we continue working together, we can indeed begin to see the green shoots of growth and later some better performance of growth. I was told that there will be a Q&A, so my journey ends here with these positive possibilities. The rest of the issues you read in my budget statement, but we need to look forward now to what is achievable. With those few remarks, I thank you very much. I'll be taking some questions, I understand. Thank you very much. Do I stay here?
Minister, thank you very much. May I suggest, Minister, that we probably detain you for a little bit longer here at the podium for the Q&A. This is a very kind detention.
Okay.
In case I scared you. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Minister has indicated, that we have made provision for the Q&A so that you could be afforded the opportunity to engage with the Minister and ask questions. There are roving mics, so please, if you could just raise your hand so that the mic can be brought to you. There's a hand here. And just introduce yourself and please ask a brief question. Minister, how many questions should we take?
Three
per round? Three per round? Okay, we'll take 3 questions.
Minister, thank you very much for taking questions this morning. My name is Meral Kreslo. I work for Oppenheimer Funds, and we are keen investors in your debt markets. My question relates, unfortunately, again to the medium budget that you presented, and also some of the very bold statements that were attached to it, such as your comments with regards to the wage bill, recognizing the issues with public wage bill. One interesting thing in the medium-term budget was that you kept that line constant despite the agreement that has been signed previous to you taking this ministerial seat. how are you going to achieve that line being kept constant? And what shall we expect going forward, especially in light of the upcoming elections?
Can we have the second question, if there's any?
Oh, there isn't. That's wonderful.
Minister, should we ask you to deal with that question whilst the audience is
no, there isn't
some
another
courage?
question. I think that's very nice. I think the approach that we have taken is that this continuously increasing pressure on the public sector wages is not good for the country. Public sector wages, I think, account for about 35% of the budget. That's quite large. So when we talk about reconfiguration, we mean that we must find some creative ways to deal with this wage bill. Amongst other things, it means, for example, that people retire. So, you know, every year so many people are going to retire. I don't have the numbers with me. So if the posts are not that critical, you don't recruit new people to fill the numbers, but you promote within your pipeline to occupy those positions. It's another way to deal with it. I'm sorry to say people die as well. Even civil servants die every year. So it affords you the opportunity to reduce the numbers and so on. I'm not wishing anybody death, but it happens. So there's a way of keeping the bill, the wage bill flat. But also departments have to find a way to reprioritize within their budgets. My observation so far is that there are many instances where departments actually don't spend what they have. And we have said that, provinces, national government as well must find a way to reprioritize. There's a lot of screaming and shouting about it, but we don't hear it. We hear the noise, but we're not listening, because if you listen too much, like I must tell you, there was one municipality which last week was crying foul that they lost money in a bank called VBS, and therefore they were unable to pay salaries last week. And then they phoned me to say, can you allow us to pay salaries from our share of the equitable grant next year? So we want to take next year's money to pay last week's salaries. I said, well, you'll have to come and fetch me from a mental hospital to agree to that. Because I couldn't agree to that. I said, no. So there are ways. You just have to stay firm with this situation, become equally as unpopular as Trevor Manuel. That's what you have to do, to keep the ceiling. Otherwise, you can lose control. But I don't want to lose as much hair as him, though.
Thank you, Minister. Can we get another set of questions? There's a question right at the back of the room.
Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. I'm Puneet Pujara from Autonomy Capital. I have a two-part question in terms of the challenges that South Africa faces. One more short-term, upcoming budget in February. You're facing elections in a couple of months, and how are you going to balance, the political realities with the financial realities, of the country, and longer term. What are the ways you're thinking about, bailing out the SOEs, or helping them out? I mean, this is just a problem, being, pushed out in future. Is there a plan from the Finance Ministry side on it? Thank you.
Let me start with the publicly owned companies, and I think Minister Gordhan will deal with this in detail. In the budget speech, we mentioned that there should be no holy cows when we reconfigure these publicly owned companies. I know he won't like me saying this, but let me say it nevertheless. So we have South African Airways, well-known South African airline, which has the marginal propensity to lose money. And therefore tends to approach the government on a regular basis for support. South African Airways also owns a percentage, about 1.7% thereabout, of 5%, 3% of Airlink, which seems to be making a bit of money, the Airlink company. South African Airways also owns 100% of South African Express, which is kind of the feeder airline. South African Airways has major onerous legacy contracts with suppliers, but also has some very bad management things. The simple thing, for example, I understand, Minister Gordhan, that there are people who manufacture and sell airline tires. So there's a tendency not to buy directly, but to go via an agent. So the agent has for many years been receiving a commission for selling tires to South African Airways. And the agent is going nowhere because that's their livelihood. Even the ones that supply with cheese and biscuits in the plane, onerous contracts, pilots have onerous contracts with South African Airways. I'm told on a particular day, I won't mention the percentage, but X percentage of the employees of South African Airways are on sick leave. But if you go home, you find them doing the gardening. They're not sick. But it's ingrained in the culture of the organization. It's loss-making. It's very clear to me that you are unlikely to sort out the situation. So my view will be close it down. Close it down. We have the case study of Swiss Air, which had to close down, and you start a new airline. Altogether, invite Sim Shabalala and others to come together, syndicate, and form a new airline. The only thing we might request is that give us the colors, like British Airways. So you say you want to fly the national colors, fine. You can fly it, but you don't have to own this thing that we can run. I leave that problem with Minister Gordhan. And they're going to be asking him to clarify this statement. The thing I say, why I say close it down is because you will not, it's unlikely that you're going to find any private sector partner, equity partner, who would come and join this asset. If there are any one of you who want that, please talk to us. Because so reconfiguring means, for example, that in all sorts of assets that we own as a state, we're prepared to have private sector partners that we can work with. That's part of the reconfiguration. But there's something that Minister Manuel will agree with me that I think is a failure on our part, which we need to correct. In 1994, we went into government together. One of the first things that we did was to ask for an audit of state-owned assets, 1994. And we said of in this audit, let's identify core and non-core assets. 1994. So I come back into government in 2018 and I hear the same thing. So I say, I now believe in reincarnation. It's really true, this thing. Because in 1994, we talked about the same thing. In 2018, the same thing. So, but I want to promise you that next year, when we have this conversation, we'll no longer be talking about a list of assets and so on. We'll not be talking about we are going to reconfigure. We need to be able to demonstrate we have reconfigured this one and that one and that one. That's the way to go. Otherwise, we're wasting our time and wasting your time and your expenses coming here. So we'll do something about it. The first question had to do with what do you do in a tough budget situation approaching elections? Well, one of the things that we have learned over the years is that there is a tendency indeed by governments to loosen the purse as they approach the elections. And more often than not, this has taken the form of special allocations for civil servants. In Ghana, for example, oops, there's nobody from Ghana here, huh? In Ghana, for example, if you look at the Ghana fiscal position, just before the elections, there's a sharp increase in salaries. Then it gets quiet for 4 years. Next election, sharp increase, and so on. We're not going to do that kind of thing. A government must be judged not what they've done 3 months before an election, but what they've done for 5 years. That's what matters. Fortunately, I can say I was not there. I can say that.
We've got time for one more question, if there's any from... I think the lights are a bit blinding, so if you see struggling to see you, especially if you're closer to these big flashlights, please bear with us.
Minister, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm here on behalf of the International Trademark Association. We deal mainly with intellectual property and trademark issues. I know it's not directly related to your portfolio, but it's somehow related to investment. A couple of months ago, we are happy to see that, the South African government, had adopted the intellectual property policy phase 1. So that's a good step, especially for us, we deal with trademark and IP policy. We have a couple of members, most of our members are based in South Africa. So, but recently we saw that from the Department of Health, which is considering to adopt what we call a brand restriction policy, in the sense that, let's say that we go to a supermarket, we cannot make a difference between a product, whether it's Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola or a Ford or a Mercedes, so on and so forth. So from a trademark perspective, it's a bit, a concern. Because why? I think it contributes to increase, counterfeit goods. And we know also the link between counterfeit goods and national security. Yes. So to make it short, we would like to know where is the government going? Because when we look at the IP policy, which is more balanced, and we look at the recent development, is not really the case. So we are a bit out there, and we really don't know.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Minister.
No, thank you very much. I know nothing about that, though. But what I can promise you, is that we'll speak to the Minister of Health. We'll say, Minister, let's focus on the key strategic issues that are confronting the country. Now, what about this thing, whether this is a correct cigarette label or this? Let's make the hospitals to function. Leave these things aside. Focus on the key strategic issues. Yeah? That the doctors are there, in the hospital, they're working, that the patients have got beds and linen. That's the most important thing that the Minister of Health should focus on, not on the label of a cigarette box, really, truly speaking. So, but we'll speak to the Minister. about this. I'll explain to him what you said to me and let him focus really on the strategic issues confronting our people, not these marginal issues. Well, but I need to come back to, I need to come back to the issue of the reconfiguration of state assets again, because the chairman of ESCOM is here. Because if we're serious about attracting investment, we also need to think very seriously out of the box. For example, there's nothing God-given that says that ESCOM must be involved in the whole value chain in the electricity production. Generation, transmission, distribution. It's nothing like, there's no God-given thing like that. So we have to think very seriously about a reconfiguration of ESCOM such that probably we need to separate the transmission from the generation in a very serious way, so that we can form a national grid company that's responsible for the national grid, managing it, and then on the other hand, have a series of power producers, which will include ESCOM, but there will be others as well. And I think we need to think about that. The distribution model, I know nothing about, but I know, and Trevor Manuel will remember this, somewhere in 95, 96, we discussed something called the REDS. That's in the 90s. 2018, still talking about the same thing. So there needs to be some movement, and I think what needs to characterize the Ramaphosa administration is the speed with which we move and implement things, so that we don't behave like crab. You know, a crab thinks it's going forward, but actually it's going sideways all the time. So we don't want to move like crabs. We want to go forward. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much. Thank you. Minister, thank you very much.